Hello, 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 good people out on the YouTube, out on the internet. It is Todd Shannon, data scientist, social commentator, getter of buckets. And I'm not going to explain to you why my stream is a little bit tardy. I'm fashionably late. Just put it that way. Life happens. What do you want me to do? I'm so excited to celebrate with you today. This is, dare I say it, hopefully I don't get shut down for saying this, Insurrection Day. Happy Insurrection Day. We have to celebrate. This might be one of the most holy of days for the left, for those who are Trump deranged. They love J6 because J6 represents all that is, it's all of the hopes and dreams of them bottled up all into one neat little package called the J6 Insurrection. And it's the day when they finally oust one Donald J. Trump from ever holding public office again. Except, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. We have weathered the storm, so to speak. And despite all of the attempts to convince us that what would otherwise be described as a rowdy, a bit of a riot, it's a riot, riot's an appropriate term for it. An insurrection, it was not. But we do have to celebrate J6 and all that it represents and just go back down memory lane, dig up some facts and figures about the whole ordeal, because it is very important that you understand what actually happened. What is the deal with the J6 phenomenon? Now, I just got to say one more thing. I would be very, very, very surprised if by the time Joe Biden leaves office, he doesn't make January 6th a national holiday, right? I'd be very surprised if people didn't get time off to mourn and to ever remember the worst day in American history, even worse than 9/11, right up there with the Civil War, the day that a bunch of unarmed people took a guided tour in the U.S. Capitol by Capitol Police. This is, in fact, a travesty. You got to hit him with the air horns. But we are going to unwrap the phenomenon of J6, its implications, and I'm glad you've joined. Now, if you are in the chat, go ahead and give me a shout. Go say what's up to your boy, and I'm happy to finally come back and do a live with you. I haven't done a live with you guys for some time. Now, I want to start out this live with an anecdote, an observation, if you will, something that I realized later on or earlier today that I think is important. Now, the Trump deranged will twist my words in a way that I can't be concerned with because, that's what the Trump deranged do. But I am going to say this. Just because I am invoking the name of Jesus with this comparison, that does not mean I'm comparing Donald J. Trump to Jesus in any way, in the sense that Trump is some righteous and holy man, and as was Jesus. I am not making that comparison, but this illustration is, I think, pertinent. Are you ready for this? Jesus was falsely accused of inciting an insurrection. Just let that wash over you. Jesus was falsely accused of inciting an insurrection. You see, during Jesus' time, he was obviously a threat to many of the establishment Jewish leaders of his time. And they called him all types of things that never really stuck. He was a blasphemer. He was demon possessed. He was all of these weird things. It sounds weird even saying it, even in descriptive form. It feels blasphemous to be talking about Jesus in this way, but that's what they said about him. But none of it really stuck, you see, because, the proof was in the pudding, right? He was doing things that no one could do except they had the power of God, and his wisdom was irresistible. They couldn't refute the things he was saying. So they said, we got to get rid of this fella. Let's say he's trying to overthrow the Roman government that's incited insurrection. And this is why he, over his his cross, they had this sign that said King of the Jews. During his questioning by Pontius Pilate, Pilate asked him this point blank. He says, "Are you the King of the Jews?" And Jesus said, "Yes, it is as you say." But then he said something very important. He said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, then my servants would fight." And in that statement, he clarified what he meant. He made it clear, "I'm not trying to set up an earthly government." Those were his words. But the people nevertheless said, "No, we need to crucify him, crucify him. This guy's an insurrectionist. He's trying to overthrow the government, blah, blah, blah." And the rest is history. Well, I think this is pertinent because this is exactly what they did to Donald J. Trump in this particular situation. Donald Trump said out of his own mouth, "Let's go and peacefully and patriotically, let's go and make our voices heard." Peacefully and patriotically. What does that mean? What do those words mean if they don't mean peacefully and patriotically? Why do we even have words if we're not going to take heed to the meaning inherent in the words? What do they say on the left? "Oh, that's not what he meant." When he says peacefully and patriotically, that's a dog whistle that he means overthrow the government, which is an odd way of interpreting one's speech, I must add. I must admit. But here's the thing. This is another thing that we can take from this. Again, the Trump deranged are going to try to twist my words. Don't do it. Don't go there. But I'm going to say it anyway. During Jesus' time, there are people who said these things about him. They say, "Hey, like I said, he's a blasphemer. He's demon possessed. This guy's, he's crazy. He's out of his mind." But then Jesus said, "I'm the Son of God." He said, "I am," which is to say, I am God. And I am God. They understood exactly what he meant when he said, "I am." Before Abraham was, I am. So think about how diametrically opposed those two claims are about who Jesus is. God incarnate, literally incapable of moral error or sin, or a deranged, demon-possessed blasphemer. Gosh, once again, it feels terrible to even describe Jesus in that way, and just even repeating someone else's words. The reason why that's such an important point to point out is because there is no possible way where some of both of those things can be kind of true, right? Oftentimes when there are different perspectives on a phenomenon or a person, there's often a situation where you can say both of those things are at least a little bit true, right? From a certain perspective, you can see, there might be some of that true. Like even if we take something that we all love as conservatives, something like capitalism, there are some concerns that people have about capitalism that can be legitimate. For example, if everyone's going to have to fend for themselves and it's a free market society and all of this stuff, then some people are going to be left by the wayside. The people who are some poor people are going to get some of them are going to get run over. Sometimes that's going to happen. That's a legitimate thing. It doesn't mean that the net benefits and yield of capitalism aren't great, but that's the claim that capitalism sometimes can be bad for poor people in very certain circumstances. It's very specific circumstances, I should say. It's not completely vacuous, but I still think the greater point remains. Capitalism, free markets, that's the best thing for poor people overall because they have an opportunity to move up. There are some things, though, that can't both be true at all. Like either one of them is true or the other one is completely false. Or, of course, they could both be false, but they can't be both a little bit true. And that thing about Jesus, either he's God incarnate or he's a deranged person. No version of reality where those two things can coincide from any perspective. There's a similar thing, obviously a difference in degree, with Donald J. Trump. Because there's some who believe that Donald J. Trump is the best president of, the last decade, not decades, sorry. Last 50 years, right? You got to go back to maybe Reagan to see someone who has been more impactful. That's what some people believe. Some people say Donald Trump. Donald Trump got more votes than any president in the history of the presidential election, more than Obama, more than any other person not named Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Which, if you believe that President Brandon got 80 something million votes, I got a bridge I got a bridge I'd like to sell you. I got some swampland in Florida I'd like to sell you. But in any case, Donald Trump got a lot of votes. And then there's a lot of people who say Donald J. Trump is the worst person in the history of American politics. He is literally, president, he's Adolf Hitler 2.0. Right? And when you think about it, there's no way that those two things can both be kind of true. There's no version of reality where you could be the most evil, racist person ever in the history of our nation and also the best president in modern times. But luckily, we have some hard data. We have some hard facts that we can use to measure whether or not those claims are true. And I want to share that with you right now because this is some data from Pew Research. And, what do we hear constantly? The drum that was being beat by the Democrats is that this guy's evil, he's racist. But interestingly enough, during Donald Trump's tenure, the percentage of GOP support from black voters increased and Latino voters increased, right? Despite the fact that they said he hates Mexicans, he hates Latinos, he hates black people, he hates... The support from those demographics grew. They were certainly better than they were for GW, George H.W., even Reagan, right? So how can that be true? How can he be the most evil, racist person ever and gain in popularity with black voters and continuing to gain in popularity with black voters? So we see here this Pew Research graphic. You see that over here, this represents from left to right, 96, 2004, 2012, and 2019. And we see the percentage of white voters, right, versus black and Hispanic and other ethnicities. And just to contrast here, let's look at 2012. That was kind of the height of, the black people were all in because that was the Obama years, right? We see that overall, 11% of the populace who voted were blacks, 8% Hispanic, 6% other. 2019, it remained at 11% for blacks. The Hispanic votes rose by 3%, and then 8% for other. But let's look at the Republican or Republican leaning or right leaning. It went from 7% in 2004. There was a dip in 2012. Again, those the Obama years, which makes sense. These are black and Latino. But then 2019, it came back up to 7%. That's the Trump years. And you can see this also reflected in the Democrat vote. You see that they lost ground by 2%, right? So we could say rightfully that probably about 2% of the black vote in 2019 at least switched over to being a Trump supporter, GOP voters. How is that possible when that's the most racist and evil man ever? You see huge gains in that area. And so, and then we have another, here's an article in the Washington Post. This was in 2023. In September 2023, Trump hits new hot poll highs with black and Hispanic voters. What's to make of it? So they're trying to explain it. They're trying to say, didn't we tell you he was racist? How come you blacks and Latinos don't know any better? How come you don't think for yourself? How come you don't do what the white liberal tells you? Interestingly enough, so it says either former Donald Trump's standing in early 2024 polls is inflated or we are headed for a sizable realignment on how non-white voters cast their ballots. Multiple polls in recent weeks have shown Trump performing historically well among black and Hispanic voters in head-to-head matchups with President Biden, helping him neck and neck with Biden in a way he rarely was during their 2020 matchup. Across 5 high-quality polls that have broken out non-white voters in the past month, Trump is averaging 20% of black voters and 42% of Hispanic voters. Both numbers, and especially for the black voters, could set modern-day records for a Republican in presidential election. What are we to make of that? It goes back to what I was just saying just now. What I was just saying is that there's no way he's the greatest president in the last, half century. And he's also Hitler incarnate, the second coming of Hitler. One of those things is 100% false. And I think if the gain in popularity that he has realized over the last, 7-8 years among blacks and Hispanics is any indication, it's that the left, the mainstream media, the propagandists are lying and everyone knows it. This is encouraging because it means that we obviously aren't as stupid as the left-wing media and the liberal whites establishment, the people who control the narrative. We aren't as stupid as they think we are. Of course, I always knew that, but it's great to see hard data to that effect. Now, let's shift our attention to January 6th, the greatest insurrection in the history of insurrections. Because, there you go. This is, the left loves this. They've gotten so much mileage out of this January 6th thing. And I want to bring your attention to something because I think many people don't realize these are not necessarily insurrections, but there actually historically have been 4 documented attacks on the U.S. Capitol prior to the supposed attack on the Capitol during January 6th of 2020. And the Capitol riots, which is, I think, a more appropriate expression of what actually happened that day, was not an attack on the Capitol. It was people expressing their frustration about clear, shall we say, abnormalities, clear inconsistencies, clear shenanigans afoot with respect to the electoral process. And people did not believe that the election was fair. And so that's what we saw expressed there. Not an insurrection, not an attempt to overthrow the government, but an attempt to express the frustration and a disbelief of what was perceived to be a stolen election. Whether you believe that happened or not doesn't matter. The point is that those people believed it. And what they didn't do was try to overthrow the government. But we're going to see what an actual attack on the Capitol looks like. We have 4 documented examples. Let's have a look. 4 historic attacks on the U.S. Capitol. 3 sticks of dynamite, July 2nd, 1915. Newspaper headlines across the U.S. blared about the frenzied attack of a suspect identified as a professor at Cornell University. Always these weirdos, these leftists at these, Ivy League or elite institutions. It's quite incredible. Frank Holt, supposedly, described by the New York Times as an educator with a reputation among his associates as an easygoing man. The suspect had smuggled 3 sticks of dynamite in a suitcase into the Capitol on July 2nd, 1915. Finding the Senate chamber locked, he settled on an area in the Senate's reception area. The bomb went off hours later, causing damage. The attacker had sent a letter to Washington paper under the moniker R. Pierce, expressing opposition to the U.S. selling arms and munitions to Germany's enemies as the First World War progressed. Come to find out, this was a nut job suspected of poisoning his wife in 1906. He ended up dying in a way that was very Epstein-esque. It says, interestingly enough, Winter, which was his real name, was dead by July 6, 1915, killed by a fall in prison. It was ruled a suicide. That's very Epstein-esque, I'm not going to lie. He fell in prison. That's pretty hilarious. All right. Second one. March 1st, 1954, Puerto Rican nationalists attack Congress. Largely lost from public memory now, the push for nationhood for Puerto Rico and anger at U.S. colonialism spurred attacks on the island and in New York City, all the way up to the Frances Tavern bombing in 1975, which killed 4 people. There was even an assassination plot that targeted the president Harry Truman in 1950. In 1952, a significant majority of Puerto Ricans voted for Commonwealth status, but some nationalists were unmoved, calling it a mere facade. Nationalists Lolita Lebron, Irving Flores Rodriguez, Rafael Cansa Miranda, and Andres Figueroa Cordero, I'm trying to practice my Spanish, carried out their attacks in D.C. on March 1st, 1954 from the gallery of the House of Representatives, where members were debating a bill concerning migrant Mexican workers. 5 congressmen, Republicans Alvin Bentley and Ben Jensen, and Democrats Clifford Davis, George Hyde Fallon, and Kenneth Roberts were injured by gunfire. Bentley was the most seriously injured and required numerous surgeries, but he returned to work 7 weeks later. At subsequent trial, LeBron, wait a second. LeBron, LeBron, that name is not associated with highly respected political opinions, whether it's 1950s or today, received a 50-year sentence while the men received 75 years in prison for attempted murder and other charges. So these men literally tried to kill congresspeople. They shot and wounded 5 of them. Interesting. Let's go to the next one. Bombing in protest of U.S. military in Laos, March 1, 1971. The U.S. presence in Vietnam led to a spate of bombings and violent attacks at a host of sites, including U.S. draft board locations, as well as corporations, banks, and educational institutions seen to be supporting the war effort. Leftist militants, always the leftists, isn't it? Leftist militants. The Weather Underground claimed responsibility for a bomb placed in a men's washroom 1 floor below the Senate chamber in March 1st, 1971. The group said the bombing was in protest of the expansion of the U.S. military presence in Southeast Asia, specifically Laos. The bomb threat was phoned in overnight, 30 minutes before detonation. Given the time of day, no one was injured in the blast, but damage was estimated at about $300,000 US. So a bombing. Let's go to the next one. Armed resistance unit bombing, November 7th, 1983. As with the 1971 explosion, the bomb planted just outside the Senate on November 7th, 1983 did not lead to any casualties, though the Associated Press reported that it blew out a wall, damaged 5 paintings, and blew doors off hinges outside the office of Senate Majority Leader Robert Byrd. The estimated damage was $250,000. The bombing was called in ahead of time by a group identifying itself as the Armed Resistance Unit. The group was protesting U.S. military involvement in Lebanon and Grenada. So that's the last one. And then there is the supposed attack on the Capitol on January 6th. So let's think about this. We got bombing, shooting, bombing, and then a bunch of people stealing podiums and having a guided tour by Capitol Police. Now, I remember this thing that we used to watch when we were kids. I think it was Sesame Street, where they would say, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things is doing its own thing. One of these things are one and the same. Which one of those things are not like the other? Let's recount it. Bombing, shooting, bombing, guided tour, and rearranging furniture. Now, let's be clear. There was some violence at the Capitol. That's for sure. But do you notice in the other ones, there was all weapons used. There was intent to hurt, intent to destroy. And as we will see as we move on, it isn't entirely out of the realm of possibilities that the people actually engaging in the violence and instigating the violence might have been, shall we say, a little bit of home cooking, a little bit of inside work from, certain agencies, which we should all find curious. So that's the history of actual bombings on the U.S. Capitol. And this again, or attacks on the U.S. Capitol. And we should be able to understand the difference between, if you say to me, hey, I was at the bar, man, I was at the bowling alley and this brawl broke out. You say, oh, really? Describe it to me. It's like, oh, yeah, man, these two ladies, man, they were yelling really loud at each other. One of them even slapped the other one in the face. And then, she started, pulling on her hair and, all that stuff. And they were using profanity, man. It was a bad scene. I'd be like, yeah, that sounds like a bad scene. That's not a brawl though, right? When you think of brawl, you're thinking like, 4 or 5 guys, get ladies, whatever, going at it, throwing chairs and destroying property. Is like you described basically a couple of ladies in an argument. We got a little bit physical. The words we use should mean something. We shouldn't use words that don't mean anything, or we should use the words and use them in the way they were intended. A brawl is not a, altercation in an argument. A riot or something that got a protest that got out of hand, that's not an insurrection. All right, but hey, I need to calm down because this is J6. This is Insurrection Day. This is celebratory. I don't want to get it. I don't want to get too. I don't want to get too worked up, right, and too serious about it. This is a holiday, right? This should be national. I move to write your congressman to have January 6th permanently instantiated in our national holiday schedule. I'm for PT off. I think the markets should be closed the whole night. Okay. So now we understand that context. So now I want to shift to the actual events of J6 because I just find this so incredibly fascinating. And the thing that I find so incredibly fascinating about the events of January 6th is that for anyone who wants to know what actually happened, you can find that information. You can definitely find that information. The problem is that there are very few people who want to actually get that information. There are very few people who want that information. And one of the examples of the information that we got is that there's a gentleman by the name of Stephen Sund. He was the Capitol Police Chief on the day of January 6th. And despite the fact that he was one of the main persons who had the most reliable and credible information about what went down that day, ironically, no one in the media was interested in talking to him. But Tucker Carlson actually spoke with him, and I unfortunately closed it out here. I will find it here for you in a moment. But Tucker Carlson ended up talking to this gentleman and getting the skinny on what actually happened. Now, I just want to frame this for you because what's really interesting about this is that anytime there's any sort of crime or thing that takes place of national interest, the first thing that they do, not the last thing, not kind of secondarily, the first thing they do is they talk to the chief of police. The chief of police is the primary person. The chief of police is the primary person that they want to talk to give you updates, that what's going on. They are the official communicator of information relevant to the public. But this Stephen Sund person was never interviewed by the mainstream media. He was forced to resign the next day. And this little clip, this little snippet that we're going to read is going to, sorry, once again for the audio, it's going to show you exactly why that is the case. So let's just start this. Here, let me go back just a little bit. All right. Let's see if I can find the right spot here. So this is, again, Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund. Now, I have no idea why it's not working right now. Maybe we should give this a little quick refresh. Also, of note, this is an interview that Tucker ended up doing when he was still at Fox News, and then when they fired him, it never aired. So he had him come back and actually, give an update.
Many things like this, and as you just said, this was very different.
All right, so let's start
again. What could possibly be the explanation for that?
I'm not really sure.
But you've done this for over 30 years. You're very familiar. You've been in law enforcement in D.C. specifically for over 30 years. So you know how the city runs. You know how the federal agencies respond to protests. This is not the first violent protest.
Not at all.
There have been many.
I've done many national special security events, and this was handled differently. No, the intelligence, no jib, no coordination, no discussion in advance. It's almost like they wanted it to be watered down, the intelligence to be watered down for some reason.
That's interesting. What you're going to find is that the more you listen to this gentleman talk, the more it becomes apparent that whatever their objective was and the decisions that they made, it wasn't to secure the Capitol. I mean, at least it's not the thing that you would have expected them to do if that was their primary objective. And you can say whatever you want. You can say, oh, this is a bunch of conspiracy theories. You can say he's not telling the truth. You can say all that, but you cannot say that given the information that they had, the decisions that they made would have been the optimal ones to make if, in fact, their intention was to secure the Capitol. That's a fact. Let's listen.
I talked about a little bit in the book that maybe they were concerned for the Trump invoking the Insurrection Act, and they're worried about that. But I've had people, there's other, thoughts out there. But luckily we still have people investigating this because I still think there's puzzle pieces missing. Someone's going to find out what's really behind all this because it wasn't right the way the intelligence was handled and the way out we're set up on the Hill.
Big picture, just to restate, you've seen many things like this, and as you just said, this was very different. This was handled very differently. By whom?
By the intelligence. I'd say one, by the intelligence agency, two, by the military. So the reason why I say the military, think of this. By federal law, Congress passed a law that requires me to go to the Sergeant Arms Capitol Police Board in advance of an event and to request federal resources such as the National Guard. So Congress passed a law. It's 2 U.S. Code 1970. Look it up. Just make sure you look it up before December 22 when they changed it. So what was in effect on the 6th, that requires me to go and get approval for bringing in National Guard or federal assistance in advance. I have to go to the Capitol Police Board and get approval from congressional leadership in advance, like I did on January 3rd. I'm denied twice because of optics and because the intelligence didn't support it. So think about that.
Let me ask you the question, who made that?
Let's just review what he just said. On January the 3rd, he requested additional resources because they had intelligence that something was going down, something was brewing, that there could have been potential, escalated, altercations, riots, what have you, and they want to need additional resources at the Capitol. He requested that on January 3rd and was denied. Now, this is after they put in some special law requiring for him, by law, not by some, regulation or other kind of in-house rule, but by federal law, they required that he make these requests, rather than using personal discretion on the ground, which is also quite curious. And they made these changes just before the January 6th riot. So right at the end of 2019, which is very interesting. I encourage you to go watch this entire thing because there's a lot of interesting information here.
that decision? Who denied you?
I was denied by Paul Irving, House Sergeant Arms, and also Mike Stinger, Senate Sergeant Arms.
And who do they
On
work?
January
Who
3rd.
do they work for?
It would have been working for Pelosi on the House side. That Pelosi was the number one boss, and then McConnell on the Senate side.
So effectively, Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi shut down your request.
My request was shut down, one, because of optics, which is interesting. You're going to hear that term come up a couple more times. Optics, or the look of the National Guard on the Hill. But yeah, in the Capitol Police Board, I mean, it's unbelievable that I'm the only chief of police in the United States that has a law preventing me, not just regulations, rules that say I got to go and get approval to bring in the National Guard, a law.
A law. A law. He's the only chief of police in the country required by law to go through this process to get additional resources. I'm just saying. And he said that the answer that they gave him about why he was denied when he made the request on January 3rd was optics. So once again, I said, as a matter of objective fact, the choice that they made was not to optimize security at the building. They prioritized, by their own admission, optics. They said, oh, it's going to look bad. Yeah, I know that only the worst day in the history of American government might take place, and we believe Donald Trump is an insurrectionist, and he might overthrow the government. He might just become a dictator and forever enslave the people and start a Trump dynasty passed down from bloodline. You know, the Baron Trump in the year 2070 will be president still, right? Like some sort of medieval monarchy. We're under that kind of threat because Trump's that big a threat to democracy. Well, but, you know, additional resources, optics. Yeah, optics. If you believe that garbage, I want to say you're a stupid person, but I shouldn't use those words. Or maybe I should.
So that's crazy that Congress is going to pass a law that controls what I can do to protect the Capitol, and even in emergency. So think of this. Even while we're under attack, I have to go to those same two people to request the National Guard to be brought in. I have 340 National Guard that have been activated. At least 150 to 180 of those are in the city, many of them within eyesight of the Capitol, okay? We get to come under attack at 12:53. 12:55, I called the Washington, D.C. Police Department. I talked to their Assistant Chief, Jeff Carroll. Thank God I had talked to him at 10:59 in the morning and asked him if he could possibly put some additional resource on Constitution Avenue. And he had some CDU platoons up there. Called him, said, hey, please send those in right away, because we knew as soon as they came up to their west front, they started attacking, it was going to be bad. 12:58, I make my first call to the Sergeant Arms.
He says 12:53, the attack starts. 12:58, he makes a call to the Sergeant at Arms. Now, he's going to explain that they didn't actually send the resources until 71 minutes later. Now, I'm going to let you listen to this because this is interesting.
Asking, saying, hey, it's bad, we need assistance, I need a declaration of emergency, I need to bring in the military immediately and federal resources. I'm told by Paul Irving, quote, I'm going to run it up the chain, I'll get back to you.
The chain is Pelosi.
The chain his chain would be up to Nancy Pelosi. He didn't have to do that, but he wouldn't give me authorization. The law says in emergency he can grant me authorization.
Now let's just digest this for a moment. The law says he has the authority to grant the request that this gentleman is asking, but he says, let's see what Nancy Pelosi says. This is incredible. This is incredible. Do you see why? You see why they didn't want this guy talking? You see why they forced him to resign the next day? He's got all the tea. He's spilling it all over the place to anyone who will listen. Problem is, no one wants to listen because they just want their insurrection narrative. The worst day in American history since the Civil War. Very interesting. Now, we're going to do one more thing, and this will kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It'll bring it full circle, right? Because the wheels of justice grind slowly, but I think in this case they might, because Donald J. Trump is leading in the polls. Very, very, very strong possibility that Donald J. Trump will be the 47th president. He was already 45. He will be 47. And so I wonder, though, does he still say 45? He's still basically 45, even though he didn't have consecutive terms. So anyway, but there's some people who are asking the questions. Stephen Sund alluded to the fact that there's still some holes, some gaps in knowledge that need to be filled, and someone needs to investigate it. Well, this gentleman that I'm about to introduce you to, he's a member of Congress, and he might be the guy that basically brings it all full circle. Now, once again, these interviews are 30, 40, 50 minutes long. Go watch them. But we're going to listen to this gentleman and what he has to say, because this is quite interesting.
But he didn't. He said he'd run up the chain.
Sorry.
To American citizenry and our assembly online to exercise our rights under the First Amendment, to talk to each other about whatever we want to talk about, including the insidious oppressions of COVID that we were suffering across the country. So, concerns about where the election was going, the whole mail-in ballot thing, we could see the stage was being set for a compromised election cycle, possibly. And to our horror, that's what happened. So,
and by compromised election cycle, it means mail-in voting, mailing ballots, which we know is inherently a weaker security protocol than voting in person with voter ID. By the way, Democrats have fight against any and all measures that would increase the security of our election cycle, of our election process. Anything that will increase the security of it, they're against it, which is curious. It doesn't matter if it's voter ID or not having mail-in ballots, or whether it's ballot harvesting or all of this other nonsense. They're against anything that would increase the security of the vote. And more specifically, I think, which is probably the most the biggest thing that happened, which is the suppression of information that would have changed the mind of many voters, i.e. the Hunter Biden laptop. So he's describing why the people were there on January 6th, why they were protesting, and that there were legitimate reasons to be aggrieved, as it were.
FBI had fingerprints on this thing for many months prior to J4, 5, and 6.
Now he's going to talk about the FBI and their apparent involvement.
I want to go back to something you said in the first sentence, which is you have seen evidence, and that spurred your questions to Chris Wray, that there were FBI assets dressed as Trump supporters within the Capitol. So that is proof of entrapment, because, of course, the federal government could have prevented entry into the Capitol building. There aren't that many doors. You work there, you know. But they allowed people in on purpose to entrap them. That's what that proves, I think. Does it not?
Well, it's certainly condemning. It's another piece of the strategy that the government employed to sort of complete the entrapment.
So they have proof that FBI agents dressed as Trump MAGA supporters were in the Capitol. Now, we're not even going to go into Ray Epps. Many people know about Ray Epps. Ray Epps was seen outside the Capitol days before January 6th, encouraging people to go in the Capitol. He said, we need to go in the Capitol. It is so hilarious. I almost should bring it up. So hilarious, because immediately people started saying, Fed, Fed, Fed. Like he was so obviously a plant, right? And here's this guy on tape encouraging people to go in the Capitol. And they were basically arresting anyone who walked near the Capitol during the time. They were basically putting everybody in jail, mass arrests to the tune of north of 1,000 people were arrested. But they didn't arrest that guy, which is, if I am going to use strong language here. If you don't believe that guy was involved and he was inciting the so-called the insurrection, you're a stupid person. And stupidity, as I've heard it described, stupidity is not a mental acuity problem. It's a moral depravity problem. A stupid person is evil. When you believe, and I shouldn't say, let me just temper my words here a little bit. there's something in you that is malformed, that is worthy of being transformed and conformed. If you believe that that the FBI, given this information, if you don't have the information, that's one thing, but given this information, if you don't believe that these people were intentionally inciting the so-called insurrection, given all of the information that we have, the fact that they were denied resources, Capitol Police, when requested, were denied resources despite supposed intelligence that there would be escalated necessity for additional resources for law enforcement and to deal with any skirmishes. The most likely case scenario, the most likely explanation to that is that those, quote, sources of intelligence were actually federal assets, people who were planted as cells inside of these conservative groups that were actually themselves trying to egg people on towards violence and escalated altercations with federal law enforcement and other authorities. So the reason why they said, well, we don't want to give you additional resources to deal with these threats is because we are the source of the threats. We are the source of the intelligence of the chatter. Our assets are people in these cells trying to encourage people to do things. And Ray Epps is the smoking gun because we have somebody who they declined to prosecute, although he was telling people to break the law and enter the Capitol illegally. Let's listen.
Of Americans that they had infiltrated and then prodded and provoked with online with those original seeds planted of actions like, what type of gear to wear and just in language that incited behavior that could go the wrong way. Pushing actions of legal and legitimate peaceful protests to an edge where those Americans would likely not have gone had they not been encouraged by the FBI plant amongst their number that they didn't know was there. So by the time it was actually J6 and you had masses of Americans assembled outside the Capitol, almost like 99.9%, 100% peaceful. On the inside, you had FBI assets dressed as Trump supporters that knew their way around the Capitol.
Before the doors even open.
Before the doors open. Or else how are you going to get around the Capitol? You've been there many times. You need a guide to get from whatever door you go in.
It's a labyrinth.
It's a maze inside there. So that's right. So there's no way, just Americans, most of which have never been to the Capitol, there's no way they can come in some random door that gets opened and then get their way directly to the statuary or the House chamber or the Senate chamber. It's just not possible. So the FBI assets that were dressed as Trump supporters that were inside the Capitol were there, I believe, and evidence indicates that they were there to specifically wave in the Trump supporters that had gathered outside the Capitol, and the doors opened and they were allowed in. And on the inside were there's some more Trump supporters, but really those were FBI assets, law enforcement assets that knew their way around the Capitol. And they waved those guys in, said, come on, follow us. And they're the ones that led them on the path directly. How do you think a guy who's never been to the Capitol gonna come into the Capitol all amped up on emotion and make his way straight to Nancy Pelosi's office? Come on.
It's a fair question. Have you ever been? I've never been to the Capitol, but apparently it's a labyrinth. You're not going to know where Nancy Pelosi's office is if you don't have someone to take you there.
Like I couldn't get it. There's no way. I've been there for 7 years. I could come in some random door at the Capitol and make my way to Nancy Pelosi.
Everything is unmarked. I mean, those leadership offices are unmarked. So how would you know
It's
that?
confusing
That's
to get
right.
around in the Capitol. Every American that has been there knows this. When you go on a tour, you bring your family to D.C., you go through the Capitol, you have to have a guide. And on January 6th, the guides were FBI assets, the law enforcement assets. And they were dressed as Trump supporters. They were positioned inside the Capitol prior to the doors being opened so that the Americans that had assembled outside the Capitol, once allowed in, could be brought directly to the areas where the FBI and the DOJ and the deep state actors knew would be the most sort of condemning criminal action of Americans being inside the Capitol, protesting without permit and things. They knew they were setting the stage for arrest and prosecution.
Now, just think about it. Doesn't that information, isn't that very cohesive, and doesn't it make sense of the fact that you just think about, why would the Capitol Police, if supposedly, and listen, and again, I don't want to make light of any sort of altercations or violence that happened at other parts of the building, but if you're on the Capitol and you're basically on comms and you hear that on the other side of the building, you got people basically fighting for their lives, supposedly, why would you start just letting the other people in and then giving them a tour around the building? At the very least, listen, none of those people were armed. Capitol Police, they're all armed. Why wouldn't they say, you know what, you guys got to get out of here right now, or we're going to start shooting, or we're going to do something? Who told the Capitol Police to start marching these people around the building? Who told them to do that? That's a fair question.
It's such a crime. Who planned this, do you think?
Well, I think the factions planned this. I wouldn't say who, Tucker, because I don't think there was one person that planned this. But I believe the faction of establishment liberals within the FBI and the Democrat Party and our intelligence services to another extent use their massive powers of surveillance and investigative assets that they have across the country, confidential informants, registered informants, non-registered informants, voluntary informants. It's a complex web of FBI assets across the country that can be activated. So if you have authority at some of the highest levels in the FBI, it doesn't take much. The faction within the FBI and within our intelligence services that would coordinate with the most extreme liberal factions within the Democrat Party that were desperate to keep Trump out of office.
And there it is. Desperate to keep Trump out of office. And that's what this whole thing is about.
And worked within the theater of operations, shall we say, that had been set by the COVID alleged medical emergencies nationwide, and millions and millions of mail-in ballots. There's no daylight between the compromised election cycle of November 2020 and ultimately what happened on J6. So you ask who planned this. This would be the combination of several of the most extreme liberal, anti-Trump, anti-America First factions that were in positions of authority within our federal law enforcement organizations and the Democrat Party across the country.
Easy. And when you say that there were FBI assets in the crowd, in the building beforehand and certainly outside, what's the scale of this? Are you talking like 10, 20?
No.
Now,
based upon
this next statement is going to blow your mind.
On some very conservative but like hard investigative effort evaluation of the numbers, from putting together eyewitnesses and videos and affidavit statement and whistleblower statements and court records that have been revealed through individual criminal cases where J6 defendants have been prosecuted and smart attorneys have forced admissions by the DOJ and the FBI, but those admissions have been sealed within the parameter of that criminal case by protective order by the judge, so I can't share them, but I've seen them. So real hard, objective, and conservative estimates would put the number of FBI assets in the crowd, outside, and working inside at well over 200.
200?
Yeah.
$200? I thought it was going to say like 50. That would have been a lot. If 20 would have been a lot to me. 20. Oh, that's interesting. 10 times that amount. And he's saying this is a conservative estimate. Now, if you got a bunch of people doing Ray Epps type things, we need to go into the Capitol. Maybe they even encouraging them to get violent. Maybe they even encouraging them to destroy property. Maybe, and this is also documented, they had certain people shooting basically tear gas, and I don't know if it was tear gas, but they were shooting stuff into the crowd, right? Basically intentionally agitating the people, stoking the fires. This is, I'm telling you, the reason why they don't want Donald J. Trump to get back to the White House is because there is zero possibility of any version of reality where once he is back in power, everyone responsible for the fraud that is perpetrated on the people from the fraudulent election to the January 6th hoax, people are going to jail. You better believe it. Donald Trump is going to be out for things. I was going to say, things, but the YouTube algorithms are very sensitive to the sorts of things you say. I don't know how well they can discern euphemism. So I don't want to get this video taken down, even though I wasn't going to say anything profane or anything like that. But Donald Trump is going to, there will be, people are going to pay. And I got to tell you, given the scope of the fraud perpetrated on the American people, they have to be all in. They have to be all in. That's why they have to have any means necessary that they can use to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. They're going to do it, from fraudulently keeping him off ballots to accusing them of fake crimes. They have to be all in because the fraud they perpetrated is egregious, and people should, and I pray that many will go to prison because it's so obvious. We'll listen to a few more minutes of this, maybe one more minute.
Yeah.
So you were in law enforcement, yeah, before you came to Congress in the military as well. That's an extraordinary number. Is it?
Well, no. When you think about the scope of the operation, if you were going to do this, you would need
But
that
relative
number.
to, so like when, I don't know, Minneapolis burned down, or when St. John's, the Episcopal Church across from the White House in Lafayette Square, was set ablaze, and all the Secret Service agents were injured. Were there 200 FBI assets in the crowd among Antifa then?
I mean,
I doubt it.
I don't know how many undercover agents FBI
I'm gonna go
in
on
a situation
I'm
like
gonna go
that.
out on a limb and say no.
But J6 was the final act prior to arrest and prosecution of Americans that were identified as Trump supporters. I mean, the objective was to destroy the entire MAGA movement, to forever stain the patriotic fervor that was associated with the America First MAGA movement that had won in 2016, and we believe won again in 2020. And the establishment
Facts.
on both sides, in both major parties, were determined to smash that out of existence, not just by defeating Trump, but by destroying the reputations of the movement itself.
All right. So there's much more to that interview. I encourage you to go watch it. It's Tucker on Twitter, or Tucker on X, however you want to say. So what are we to confirm, friends? There's much more that I could go into. I mean, this really is as odd as it sounds. This is just scratching the surface of all the things that took place to make the fraudulent worst day in American history take place, i.e. J6. I hate this because today is my little sister's birthday. And I'd like to think that January 6th, that's the only thing I would like to think about when I wake up in the morning is, hey, it's my little sister's birthday. Let me say happy birthday to my little sister. But now, forever stained into the minds of the people is J6. I apologize to everyone whose birthday is today, because now you're your your annual celebration is forever tainted by this fraud perpetrated on the American people. So it's ridiculous and so worthy of ridicule. And that's why I say today is Insurrection Day. Happy Insurrection Day. Let's celebrate it. Let's celebrate it as the day the radical left harpooned their own agenda by so brazenly and sloppily lying to the American people that even though I think the wheels of justice grind slowly, they will grind eventually to uncover the fraudulent activity of the people responsible for deceiving the people. And this will ever be the marker of the day. I think many years in the future, we will find that there was such egregious lies and deceit, much like what happened during St. Floyd's protests. I'm going to say St. Floyd. I encourage you to watch the fall of Minneapolis because that's another fraud that was perpetrated upon the people, and it was another thing that used to fuel much of the rhetoric and much of the activities that even took place in the 2020 election cycle. So, what am I saying? What is the takeaway? Friends, we have to be vigilant. 2024 is here. We're finally in 2024. In October of this year, we will go to the ballot and we will vote on the next president. Mr. Donald J. Trump, as flawed a man as he is, yes, he is a flawed man. The symbolic victory of him returning to the White House would say to the lying media, to the corrupt Democrat Party, and many on the right. I don't just want to put this on the Democrats because there are many on the right who are just as corrupt. I just want to put that out there. This is not a Democrat-Republican thing per se. But if you're a Democrat, you got to be all the way in. If you're Republican, you got to be covert. And the people who are the resistance against this fraud are mostly on the right, conservatives, patriots. And by the grace of God, hopefully we can defeat these people. But I do want to say this. I think this is important. I was thinking about this last Sunday when I was in church. Sometimes victory doesn't look like what we think it should. Jesus' death on the cross is a testimony to that. Sometimes what actually ends up being victory is something that looks like defeat. And trusting in the providence and the grace of God and the wisdom of God is to understand that no matter what happens, the will of God is being done. Right? That God is orchestrating everything according to his purposes and plans. And so we don't have to be distraught over any outcome. The wicked, whether they get away with their lies temporarily or not, again, the wheels of justice roll slowly, but they do roll. And nobody is pulling the wool over God's eyes. There's nobody getting away with anything. And so God is using everything for his glory, for his honor. And so we respect that, we honor that, we trust that. We don't have to fly off the handle and be distraught whenever we don't have certain political outcomes. That's not our thing. What we do know, though, is that God is on the throne. He's in control of everything. But we want to do what we can to expose the evil of and the deceit of the enemy wherever we can so that we can live peaceable lives. Well, friends, let me know what you think. Make a comment. Hopefully you're having a great Insurrection Day. And hope that in the future, we can continue to expose these truths and help the people get this information. If you like this content, please like, share, and subscribe. Please tell somebody about Todd Thinks, somebody about the content, and share it on your social media, share it on your pages, and I will appreciate it. We will fight this fight together. Till next time, friends, God bless you.